experience and feeling. Program with total assurance that we are each somebody.
One thing we didn't talk about was recording it so we could all share it afterwards for those who weren't able to participate. Are you able to do that for us?
Yeah, it's already started.
Wonderful. All right, so we're at 3 o'clock. Welcome everybody. My name is Erica Lagios. I'm the Greater Sudbury Food Policy Council Coordinator, and I'm really grateful that we have some folks who are joining us for a really novel idea that we had created. So in partnership with Rethink Green, we wanted to bring some discussions to the table around local food. And I've been working with a number of amazing folks for quite some time, and I wanted to bring some folks into discussion about local food in restaurants. We see this come up on, over and over again because we are all very passionate about our local producers and supporting our local restaurants and how we can pair the two together. But of course, anyone involved in the food system recognizes that there are some really distinct challenges, and it's not as easy as it may seem on the outside to make those linkages happen. But there's also opportunities that are there that we could maybe learn from folks who are doing this really well. So I want to introduce our guests for our discussion today. We have James Morin from Kipling Ridge Farm, Craig Young, who's the owner of Freisenberg's and one of the co-founders of Farm to Table Northern Ontario Facebook group, and Mark Gregorinni from Verdicchio Ristorante. And I would like to give them a minute or two just to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, James.
Thanks, Erica. Pleasure to be here. James Morin, owner with my wife of Kipling Ridge Farms out in Verner. We raise pasture-based livestock primarily, so cattle, hogs, and poultry, including eggs, of course. I don't know if that fits in with birds. It's certainly part of it. Yeah, and I've been around the local food scene for a number of years. Starting with Eat Local as a board member for several years. That kind of led us to where we are today with our farm. And yeah, we're doing some other stuff out there as well eventually, looking just to be a fully diversified farm with whatever can be grown in Northern Ontario. We sell, as it stands right now, direct to local customers in sort of the northeastern Ontario.
Awesome, thank you for that, James. Craig, we'll move over to you next.
Hi, Craig Young, Freisenberg's food truck, yet to open, as well as the co-founder, as Eric had mentioned, co-founder of Farm to Table Northern Ontario. Just looking to try to help end users and restaurants reach into the province, Northern Ontario specific, and try to reach some wonderful products that we have available, and just trying to connect the farm right to the table and those end users, and in this form, the restaurants.
Awesome, thanks for that, Craig. And last but not least, Mark.
Thank you for inviting me. My name is Mark Gregorinni. I'm a manager of operations at here at Verdicchio Ristorante Enoteca and Natura Events. I studied culinary arts at Cambridge College, and I have my master's in Italian regional Italian cuisine, which I got from in Iesi La Marche, Italy. Which is part of the Slow Food University. I also completed and studied my Master's of Italian Wine Specialist and from the North American Sommelier Association. Throughout our 25 years here at Verdicchio's, we've evolved from trattoria-style Italian cuisine, restaurants serving classic Italian dishes, to using these traditions, if you would say, and integrating them with regional ingredients, which in turn is true Italian cuisine.
Awesome, thank you very much for that, Mark. So again, just to sort of summarize why we're here, you can hear the experience. You can hear the experience in my guest today, and I wanted to provide all sides of the table or the plate what sort of the issues are, the opportunities and the challenges of bringing local food into the restaurant setting. So I like to start with a success story, and anyone who's been to Verdicchio knows the quality of the food is beyond compare, and the passion that Mark brings to the operation, and the fact that local food is on the menu, which is such a wonderful thing to find in Sudbury. So Mark, my first question is for you, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some of the things you've had to do to make acquiring and serving local food in your restaurant successful for you and for us as eaters.
So I started using local food probably about, within the last 20 to 15 to 20 years. I mean, when you really think about Italian cuisine, you look at Italy's so regional in its culture that they use the items that are around them to build their menu items, and not only in restaurants but in their homes as well. It's it's nothing for them you can be 15 kilometers away and they would have a totally different food culture than from town to town, just because of what they grow there, which I always thought was great. I visited Italy every year from when I was 16 till I was 30, and spent numerous times there, and just kind of flowing my way through that kind of culture. So beginning around around after we've been open about 5-10 years after, I began to take over the menu, and started making some relationships with certain farmers that had started out around that time, and just trying to bring in their ingredients here to try and make it a little bit more regional. From there, when I went to Italy and I took my master's of Italian food or Italian regional cuisine, I began to understand a little bit more about what it is that makes regional cuisine, what it is to do seasonally, and also that our generation is basically a supermarket generation that really has no idea when anything is available seasonally. So I tried to use that and integrate it into my menus, build better relationships with producers around us, and did a little more research of what is available around here.
Sounds fantastic. So I think you hit on a really important point there right away, the seasonal nature of local food. So how did you manage to overcome, or maybe not overcome is the right word, but to sort of pivot that idea from a traditional restaurant, which has, the same menu, they might change after a year or two, to something that really captures the seasonality of local food? How did you find that transition?
So typically when I do my menus, I don't do spring, summer, fall, autumn, or whatnot. I do season one, and season one will start when our first spring items come about. So right now, even though I'm only doing takeout, I am integrating my seasonal menus into my menus that I'm available, or that I can do for takeout, such as yesterday, I just got my fresh crop of asparagus in from one of the local producers, and I'm using that. I'm also using different herbs that they're bringing in, fiddleheads, obviously. So I'm incorporating those into my dishes. Season two would be, kind of where you start going to late summer, where you're starting to get your nice vegetables coming out from the farms. So we would utilize those, and then also my cooking styles. They're diversified, so that in the summer I do something a little bit lighter, grilling, sauteing, whereas we get into more the heavier kind of your root vegetables and winter type time of the season, I would do more roasts and braises and whatnot to go with the flow.
That makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like, and I've eaten at your restaurant as well, and I enjoy that aspect of the changing seasonal menu. And have you found that there were any challenges to overcome with people maybe having to learn to expect a bit of a seasonal rotation and not finding something on the menu that they love that they had the last time they were there?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that because of where we live, I think people are more used to going to a restaurant and having the same thing that they feel comfortable with time after time after time, which is understandable. I mean, you're going out to a restaurant, you want something, I would hope that you want something that you're not going to be able to cook at home. So you want to have that meat or something, or that vegetable that you're not going to, you want to have over time. But also, I think that nutrition wise, we have to think about when is that product at its best nutrition in regards to vegetables or whatnot. Obviously, we know strawberries in the winter are pretty white and pretty bland and not much to them, whereas in the summertime, where we're coming up to this fantastic season coming up, it's much different. There's some challenges with that. I always stuck to what I wanted to do. In terms of keeping a seasonality, I think that in terms of menu wise, you have to sort of build a base of regular items that, so you can get your regular, you can get your a base guest in, and then utilize those seasonal ideas for excitement and menu change.
Yeah, definitely. No, that makes a lot of sense, and also provides a nice variety, right? And
Yeah, definitely.
Capturing what's coming in season is very exciting for so many people.
Yeah, and I think it also gives, especially for our cooks and our staff, it gives them a sense of community, because I'm always not forcing them. I'm always suggesting that they go out and take a visit to the farms, see what's available. I mean, it's a great way to spend an afternoon. So and I think it gives them a little bit more excitement and a little more pride of what we have around us as well.
Definitely. Are there any challenges that you can share with us that you come across over the years in trying to make this work? Or you mentioned relationships, and that sounds like a pretty component.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. Relationships, it goes both ways with especially the producers that I deal with. I think I always like to understand on both to see if it'll work. If what I want to do and what they can possibly do will work for both of us. I think it's very important. For example, and when it comes to the beef or pork or poultry side of things, and unfortunately, I don't use that much, and it's not because I don't believe in their quality. I strongly believe in the quality we have, but it's just that, and I think it's also, I mean, probably James and Craig could probably answer this for me. Explanation. It's also because when I receive a product, I don't want it frozen. Just basically because I like to take a product fresh and then make it into what I can. Because if I do need to down the road, freeze it for some reason, then you're manipulating it and you're ruining the product. And obviously, you know what I mean. So you're kind of you're changing the quality of that, and I don't think it's fair for the farmer or the producer to be changing that quality because of that. Of a final product, sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, there's needs that you have on the restaurant side, and I think this segues really nicely. So thank you for all that information, Mark. Moving to James to maybe speak a little bit on the farmer side, especially as Mark had mentioned not wanting or, preferring to have meat come that's not frozen. I know when I order things through ClickFork and order fresh, that's not a problem to me, and I prefer it that way because it means I can put it straight in the freezer and I don't have to worry about it, and I'm ready to cook when I need to. So that's a model that really works well for me. But James, maybe you can speak to some of the experiences that you've had on a farmer side with maybe developing relationships or successes that you want to share, or challenges with trying to get local food into more places and just through the farm gate.
For sure, and I think Mark did touch on a lot of the opportunities and the challenges that we see. Certainly on the produce side, and we haven't done a lot of that, but having been involved, I understand there's always obviously a production planning process from the farmer's point of view. And frankly, it's a little bit easier if you're working, let's say, with a chef or a restaurant owner who's looking for a certain volume of, say, whether it's greens or root vegetables. You can plan that out in the winter. You put the seeds in the ground, and barring some sort of catastrophe, as long as you know what you're doing, you can be fairly certain of that crop. In its individuality, when it comes to livestock, it's a whole different ballgame, because unless we can find somebody who's willing to look at whole animal, it becomes extremely difficult on the marketing side for us to look at getting rid of the rest of it. And that has been the biggest challenge I've found. Not that there's not an unwilling market or industry or chefs or owners, but they don't really know what to do with 80% of the pig or 95% of the cow. I mean, and I'm sure Craig and Mark can agree with this. You put a ribeye on the menu and it's going to sell. I have 95% of the rest of that animal to get rid of somewhere. And when you start talking about volumes, you might get, let's say 12 to 16 decent steaks from that particular cut. What is that? Is that a night? Like if you're doing ribeyes, chicken wings could be the same. I'm limited to 3,000 birds a year. That's 12,000 chicken wings. Run a couple wing nights in a pretty busy restaurant, they're gone. But I still have 6,000 breasts, 6,000 drumsticks, 6,000 thighs to get rid of. And so that's been our biggest challenge is we raise whole animals, obviously. And when you start having to market at volume, and the restaurants need volume, and we certainly understand that, we can't accommodate that unless it's whole animal. The fresh frozen is also difficult, but it's exactly related to that. We're simply not, and I can't really, aside from maybe Pinocchio and Hills, there's very few of us in the livestock industry across the region that are big enough to be able to accomplish that on a consistent basis. So for instance, for us, we bring in hogs in once a month. It's not logistically or economically feasible for us to try and do that even every week. We're just not big enough yet. And so that presents a serious challenge in the fresh versus frozen discussion that's there. And that's really it. It's really just those two things. The production planning, sort of the second part that I want to talk about that too, is it's long. So the quality that we get in the north, a lot of that has to do with a lot of us small guys breed as well. So we spend a lot of time developing genetics that work here in our region based on the diets that we have available here for livestock. And when you're talking cows, that can be a 2 to 3 year process that we have to plan out for. And that can be difficult for a lot of restaurants to do, to be able to plan out that for. Pork is at least a year. So we're always sort of planning a year ahead of what we expect, our demand to be. And again, that's very difficult. Chicken's a little bit easier. It's a fairly quick turnaround, but there's still complications there. So it comes back to, like Mark said, it's about a relationship that has to sort of be built initially with an understanding of the challenges of both sides and the expectations of both sides. And I mean, I agree, having I'm the only customer I have that gets the chance to have some of our stuff fresh because it's frozen at the abattoir the moment that it's ready. And yes, there's definitely a difference, but certainly when we've done exactly what Mark said, so we've taken, say, a frozen product and we haven't used it all, we do something with it, put the rest in the freezer and take it out, the quality is not the same. And it's certainly, like, for Verdicchios, that's an understatement of what the quality needs to be. But it doesn't matter if it's even if it's a burger, let's say, like, you can't mess around with that final product quality in the food service business. What we're doing at home, that's fine, right? We tend to take a more relaxed view of that, but yeah, I totally understand that, and it's a challenge, and it's simply one of scale. Yeah.
You actually kind of touched on exactly what I was going to comment next on, and it just sounds like a scale issue. So as Kipling Ridge Farms, you may not have the capacity to supply a restaurant, let alone multiple restaurants, with the items that they need. Is there any impetus, or is it even beneficial to your model of how you want to operate your farm to maybe partner with some other farms to reach a scale that might be beneficial? Is there any opportunity, or does that create more challenges of coordination?
I mean, our time at eLocal sort of told us a bit about that. When I was there, we actually had a person in wholesale that was meant to develop that, and that sort of behind the scenes coordination was an important aspect of that. Of, okay, if we're gonna try and get a restaurant to work with, what do they need? And we don't just need that one restaurant, we may need a dozen. So in just this little group where we have here, maybe Mark takes all our ribeyes and Craig's got the rest of, there's a huge amount off of a cow that goes towards the grind, right, for an awesome burger. And so perhaps Craig takes the rest of that, and then I might only have to find somewhere for the rounds and things like that, getting into specific cuts. But that's where the complication is. So yes, it absolutely would help with scale. You know, if there were a dozen of us that are all raising similar types of products there's a challenge there too. What are the production standards on the farmer side, and how are they raising things? Because that impacts quality. But if you can get that coordinated, and there's multiple different restaurants that have a different clientele and menus and things like that, you're able to use the whole animal. So you got a wing joint here, you've got a place that does a really nice chicken breast dish, so all your chicken breasts go there. You can start to make that happen a little bit better. But you know as well as I do that behind the scenes coordination is a formidable challenge.
Yeah, and not something that the farmers themselves would be likely to take on, as there are much more important things to do, like keeping the farm running. So I wanted to, yeah, touch on a little bit of something that you just brought up, which is the production practices. And maybe I'll put this out to Craig or Mark to comment on, in your opinions and perspectives and experiences on what customers might be looking for. We're trying to move towards a multi-farmer system. Would you want everyone to have the exact same practices? Would you be open to slightly different? Is there one in your view that would be optimal for how you might run your business? Whoever wants to chime in first, go ahead.
Go ahead, Craig.
So what are you specifically referring to on that one, Erica? Or do you mean the butchering approach, like whether you're using standard American butchery or French, or?
We could talk about that as well, but I'm also talking about the methods to grow produce, whether it was certified organic, whether it was, as a term we used, ecological, or how the livestock is raised. Would that matter on your end?
Would the tagging of the certification, would that matter to me as a chef or as a business entrepreneur, like in a food truck? It matters. It is nice. Mark would agree, I'm sure, that it's nice to be able to say that something is free range, free run, organic. Those are nice things. But the reality of it is, I think we all agree that we're just looking for quality food. It doesn't necessarily need to be free range or organic to be enjoyable or to be high quality. James touched on something. He was mentioning production standards, and I think that's critical. My experience, and I've run the gamut on greasy spoon type operations, working in food truck type scenarios, and then also working coast to coast in different top end hospitality venues in the Relais and Chateau properties. I haven't had as much problem with freezing product. And again, this is sort of a behind closed doors type topic, and clearly we're in an open format here, but I've been successful with freezing things. It starts out with a premium product that you're receiving, and then it's in the handling. I think in my experience, I've had plenty of customers that made the assumption that I never used freezers, when in fact I did use them. It's one of those admissions that we don't often go to, but if you get something and you control the quality as it arrives at the door, and the handling is minimal, it really is going to depend on what you're doing. So if you're bringing in salmon and you're freezing it, and then you're thawing it, freezing it, thawing, it's going to be dog food at best. So there are going to be certain things that are going to be losing quality as you change and add to the handling. There are going to be other things, like if you were doing something like a really top quality meatball sandwich, to freeze the ground meat might actually end up having some positive qualities. So I'm not so opposed to the freezing, but the handling of the carcass from the time it leaves the farm, and then how is it being held at the butcher, those are all critical things, and it's sort of up in the air. Right now, we're having trouble with abattoirs, and there aren't a lot of places that are looking to create new space in their displays at the butcher shop who are willing to take a chance. It's difficult right now. It's a tough sell for places to just say, sure, you know what, we're going to start bringing in grass-fed beef from Nipissing, or from some beef from up in Matheson, or wherever it is that you can bring it in from. You're going to be looking at small-scale farm, and given the scale of the farm, it's often going to have an effect on what you can do for price point. So then you end up with the complication of sticker shock. And as you pay more for a product, you're going to have expectations as an end user of a certain caliber. And sometimes as the cost rises, the quality doesn't always increase. It's sort of, there are certain ways to increase qualities of cuts, but a lot of those qualities have been part of the mass production operations. And so as we start to increase the amount of people that are interested in buying foods locally, Mark has been working in this space, and I'm sure would understand that sometimes if you're going to make an agreement, you need to form that relationship. Part of that relationship is going to be trying out those products personally, cooking them a few different ways, and working with that product before deciding as to whether or not you can put your stamp of approval on that and say, this is what I'm about. It takes a while to get to that stage. And right now, with Farm to Table Northern Ontario, with maybe some food sovereignty, food security issues, to just immediately drive down the street to the local farmer and buy a steak, you may have a little bit of shock with your first experience with grass-fed beef. It's in the handling and it's in understanding nutrient density and the differences in quality. It's a lot of education, and it doesn't just happen overnight, and it does take a little while. We spoke earlier about this. I know for myself, if there was some people interested in jumping into something on my concept, I like the idea of maybe taking on the responsibility of bringing in whole carcass animals to be able to butcher it down to something smaller, so that we're still going to work off of seasonally available cuts and work off of market price. But the advantage would be we would try to maybe take on that risk and responsibility of having a display counter available with some fresh products while we handle them. And again, going back to what I was mentioning about freezing, for what I would be looking to do, it would sort of be like a Northern Ontario concierge of available meats, and of course seasonally with the vegetables. My background being that I came from working for a good 5 or 6 years at seasonal places, so where we would operate between Easter and Thanksgiving. I always worked with farmers in the immediate areas, as close as 5 kilometers away from the location of the lodge. We had hospitality, so we would have rooms, we would have accommodations, and we would offer what I would still consider to be pretty premium food. And having a couple of trucks delivering everything was never enough of a security for me. So we would always ensure that we had local food immediately there and try to have at least 2 to 3 main courses available, working off of those foods. And it would be vegetables and meats. We would get in elk, bison, fish, locally made bacons from organic farmers. We were lucky to work with all these things. And the interesting part about it was I had to work hard to form these relationships, and it became a passion. And leaving the restaurant slowly, but working more with Farm to Table and trying to get out there and work with the farmers, it's really nice. It's a passion project, but I'd really love to see something come to fruition. It's difficult and it's tough, but I think we all are going to benefit if we can work more with the local farmers. But it's not going to be easy answers, and more discussions like this, I think, are going to need to take place.
Definitely. Wow. Thank you, Craig. That's for bringing that perspective. I think I'm going to circle back to one of the things you mentioned in a minute or two. But Mark, I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of answer that initial question I posed to both of you, and maybe coming from your perspective with your brand. Are single relationships for single products more beneficial, or would your business be open, if there was a way to scale up local production by farmers partnering together to get more food out there, and you may be getting certain things from multiple people, lettuces, different things from multiple farmers? Is that something that could work with your model, or do you think maintaining, the quality, the brand, not? You may not even have a exact answer because this is all hypothetical, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that if you don't mind.
I mean, I think are you talking about more like a co-op kind of situation where you
where the idea that, or the idea I feel like James and I are bringing up, where multiple farmers come together to sell multiple products to multiple restaurants. You may be getting the same product 1 week from one farmer, 1 week from a different one.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I think that and you would have to have some sort of system where your product either has to have a certain standard. Like I know in Italy, you have just like as in wine, they have DOP stamps where you get a particular region. They follow certain legislation that either they're grown the same way, or they're fed the same way, or there's legislation that tells them, okay, you have to be able to call it, say, Northern Ontario, whatever.
Yes.
This sort of criteria, and I think that if you are able to do that, then I mean, I think it would probably benefit the farmers, or the producers in a whole, because at least it would give you that guarantee to your consumer would get a guarantee that it is a quality product. I mean, as much as I support local, and I always try to support as much as possible, you have to tend to agree that there is a lot of variance in between products, and just because it's local doesn't mean it's good, unfortunately. I mean, and if like Craig said, if I'm going to put my stamp of approval on something that I'm going to be serving to my customers and my guests here at the restaurant, it has to have that stamp of approval from a cooperation of producers to tell me that, you know what, we all follow the same kind of legislation, and we guarantee that this product is what we think is our best to be able to put out, and it follows. Because then at that time, you're able to say, okay, then doesn't matter which farm I get it from, I know that I'm going to get a quality product.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, especially from your position, Craig and Mark, with your businesses on the line, right? And the perception that people have when they would come to your establishment or come to your food truck, Craig, or what they expect when they walk in that door or approach you. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think could be something that could be worked within the Northern Ontario concept, or our region, and something that I'm hoping might happen at some point with partnerships with other regions like Sault Ste. Marie and the Rural Agri Innovation Network. We've talked, the manager there, David Thompson, and I have talked about a Northeastern Ontario brand, and how do we make that happen, which would lend nicely to maybe accessing more restaurant markets with this brand that we know the quality of. We can try, test it and true sort of thing, and it would be easier then to maybe get a cooperative model of farmers together and move into restaurant situation. James, I'd like to circle back to you for a sec, listening in from the producer side. Some of the things that Craig and Mark talked about with production practices and consistent quality. I think we'd have to, if we ever tried to pursue something like this, we'd have to be not careful per se, but we maybe want to have a list of criteria that producers would, kind of check off. I think that would be feasible and reasonable to expect. Would you agree with that on the producer side, James? Something like that?
I definitely think so. I think it's maybe one of the challenges that I didn't necessarily mention is that consistency, especially on the livestock side. I work with a few other farms, not necessarily even for a product. Say if Mark or Craig were to, okay, I need my whatever, they have their list of meats that they want. Some's coming from me, some's coming from another farm. I even for myself and other farmers that I know that have been at this for well over a decade, even year to year, our consistency can fluctuate on finishing, on the size that we're getting. Never mind farm to farm when you're doing a similar type of animal. Breeds come into play. It's sort of when it first came up, when this conversation was first starting, I had thought immediately of there is a big difference between a grass finished and a grain finished cut of beef. And if that's all that's available, if you're buying from a cooperative of farmers, that's a huge shock without that education piece. And both Craig and Mark have hinted at that and mentioned how important that the consumer education piece is in understanding. We've talked sort of behind the scenes here about the farmer and the restaurateur educating each other on their needs and their challenges, but the other side of that is we're all trying to grow and sell food to people. That piece is missing as well. So there has to be flexibility everywhere. And I know, I mean, I've been at an event with Mark, and when he mentioned it, it's not a lack of willingness on a chef's side. It's at the end of the day, customers are finicky. They're spending their money, and they're right to demand what it is that they want to demand. But part of that is it's up to all of us to kind of educate farmers and chefs to educate the public on a little bit of flexibility. Because especially up here, it's growing anything up here is an absolute challenge. I've tried just about everything. We grow some pretty big gardens ourselves, and even just trying to get that lettuce to look the same from one year to the next, never mind 1 month to the next, can be a formidable challenge. And it's tough. We're all trying to do things in the environment that we're in up here, and we all know, because we live here, it's pretty harsh. So that has a huge impact on that.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point, and I want to circle back to education in just a minute, but I want to go back to Craig, in the sense of your sort of retail model, if you could maybe elaborate a bit, because I think what's unique about that is it sort of breaks the sense of that consistent menu always being the same. Your whole idea, from what I understand of it from our conversations, is from the get-go, you're going to find something new all the time. And I think that could help in the education piece with how we approach different parts of an animal, produce being different years. How do you think we could consolidate that into one operation like you might be proposing, Craig?
Well, Mark had touched on something. Like he said, it's not just spring, summer, fall, winter. Sometimes you're going to have a series of in-between menus, and it changes all the time. That's what I got very much accustomed to when I was working in the seasonal lodges. And I found that it's an interesting way of limiting scope. And then when you limit your scope, you can often find that as long as the handling of these products, whether it's plants, herbs, greens, all those types of things, and meats as well, once you're more familiar with them, it can give you a real interesting view on maybe the background as to why seasonality exists from the beginning. If you're working with local foods when they're in season, it forces you, and I think in a good way, it forces you to be seasonal. And sometimes you're going to find a lot of reasons as you go through the season. If you're going to be taking squash blossoms and deep frying them and doing different things, that only happens for a very specific time. I make a vinaigrette with chive blossoms, and it makes a beautiful pink coloration, and that's only for a couple weeks. And so learning to do that, I suppose I diminish the importance of tagging and certification. I think that it's actually important, but what's the stamp that's on the product is less important to me. I guess when you get behind something, that is in and of itself certification or tagged for some degree of some quality and caliber. And so what I would be looking to do would just experiment with stuff up front, and as you become more familiar with things, make them available to everyone. I guess that in and of itself is your stamp of approval. And so I think that's what I'd be excited to do. It's what I got accustomed to doing working at the lodges. I could only work off of what the different farmers that were in the immediate vicinity had available to me. And there would be challenges such as, this week there was a gopher or a groundhog that got into the spinach and the Swiss chard. I don't have anything. I've only got a few of these eggplants and zucchinis. Is that okay? And I would just say, just send me everything you've got and I'll navigate through it. And through that, I just had an ever-changing, I would write my menu every day. Not every restaurant can do that. And to put things into perspective, I might have been doing 25 to 40 covers in an evening. That's 25 to 40 diners. That's not an exhaustive challenge. We might be doing 5 courses for these people, working with only maybe 5 main courses, 5 appetizers, 5 desserts, and potentially other options as they start to come in seasonally. It wasn't difficult for me because of the scope of the business we did. But when you start to look at upwards of 50 covers and a really exhaustive menu, you start to need to have a larger amount of products at your availability. And you have to know that as you change those items, as you change your menus, you still have the ability to depend on their being quality and the ability of your cooks of understanding how to handle these things. You overcook, if you get a loin of tuna, obviously we're not getting that from Ontario, but if you do something like that and you handle it wrong, it can't be eaten, it can't be served, it's as good as wasted, start again. That is a massive cost. So again, back to me talking about education, there's a lot of loss that can take place while we're learning to handle these ingredients. It's almost like it'd be great if we could just magically find a bit more time and a bit more experimenting, but I think we got to dive into it. I think we got to start working with the farmers and try to work with the reality that they've got animals, and to try to only think that there's steaks and bacon coming off of, there's steaks on the cow, there's bacon on the pig, and that's it. No, there's a lot more meat to work with. And to expect restaurants to just go and buy whole hog, whole sides of beef, it's maybe not realistic. So I guess I'm trying to find an in-between to try to make it easier for people, despite maybe the price per pound might be a little bit higher, but maybe it makes it easier for the farmer to work with me. And maybe that makes it easier for me to find people, restaurants and end users, like people buying for their house alike, to be able to try something out.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there, Craig, and even touching on the aspect of the chef or the restaurateur having a bit of education on what's available. But I wanted to circle back now to the education of the consumer, because we've experienced this a lot through local, through all the things that we're trying to do with local food. It's not the same that you would get, when you went into the traditional grocery store. So my question is for all of you across the board, if you could maybe touch on one or two key things from your perspective that you would want consumers to understand about the food that you raise or grow or what you sell, and what you would want people to understand about that, and how they could help support what you do by understanding what's important about local food. And I'll make this easier. I'll start with you, James, if you don't mind.
Perfect. I think the key aspect for us is it's more expensive. And that's not because I want to charge more. It's because it costs us more. We don't have thousands of animals jammed into a barn or a feedlot, which is a very efficient way of growing meat. So we can't compete with that type of model on a local level. And there's not even if we could make a business make sense of something like that, there isn't enough demand in the region to support that. It's kind of there's such a crux there. Not only that, we're seeing it with, especially on the meat side, with issues with these large packing plants. They're very efficient. Again, that translates into a lower cost. The plants that we use locally aren't. They're small. They're I like to say they're more human scale, and so they're not as efficient, which means that translates obviously into our own cost as well. That being said, by and large, people who are doing things locally and selling things locally have a huge reputational risk, in the sense of, if we're not doing a good job, you can come over to our farm and see what we're doing and call us on it in that sense. So we try and pride ourselves in that, in the way that we grow our food, which inevitably results in more nutrient dense food. So it's one of those, you get what you pay for, and you can pay now or pay later. I don't want to get off the rails on that kind of discussion right now, but there's a reason we're more expensive, and it's worth it.
Thank you for that, James. Mark, I'll circle over to you. If there's something that you would want someone walking into your restaurant to know, or in your daily life, what would you like people to understand about local food?
Well, I think it's about culture. It's about culture of food, culture of knowing our terroir, culture of knowing expenses, knowing how much it costs. Exactly. I've always been a strong believer of you get what you pay for. If you're paying an absorbently or a very inexpensive price for pork or whatnot, there's a reason for it. If you're paying a hefty price on it, there's a reason for it. It's the care that the producers put into the product. Just as I'm sure as our restaurant, a lot of people think that we're the most expensive place in town, and probably, who knows, maybe we are. But I also put a lot of care into our product. I train my staff. My staff puts a lot of care into their products. We take the time to educate. We take the time to research on our soils and where our product comes from, and it makes a big difference on our plates. And I think that we unfortunately perhaps we don't have that culture in Northern Ontario yet, that people are willing to accept it. There's a reason why menus across Sudbury are all the same. Unfortunately, there's a reason for that. But I mean, in terms of myself promoting local food, I'll always promote local food, and I'll always try to educate my guests when they come in, why they're eating it, or what's on their plate and where it comes from. There's a story. There's a story behind every dish. There's a story behind every product that our producers do, and that's what I think it's the most important.
Those are really great points, Mark, and you've touched on that culinary tourism aspect and how do we develop that in Sudbury to help develop the story and the background and what goes into growing food in this region. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do in that area. Craig, would you have any words for consumers on that you'd like them to understand about eating, working with local food, connecting with farmers?
Yeah, I scribbled down a couple things here. I mean, the funny thing is, I think it just comes down to leadership, really. So, I mean, for everyone that joined us today, you care about what we're talking about. If you're still in the discussion here, maybe try to work on getting 10 to 20% of your grocery bill. At this stage, meats, of course, and we're well into harvesting vegetables now. There's wonderful salad greens and kale and other greens that are available locally through a number of places available at grocery stores as well as within the Farm to Table Northern Ontario group. Take a look, commit to making some purchases, 10 to 20%. It's not too much, and it's going to give you a little bit of that education that we're talking about. Through that leadership, maybe consider, silly and small as it sounds, share with your friends what your experience has been. And if there's complication, talk with the farmer. Let them know about what you've experienced, and maybe try to get a little bit of that education. Expect that the farmers are busy, but message them. It's a passive way of communicating, and they'll get back to you in good time. And if there's been a complication or something that's just a little bit different, I believe that farmers are looking to reach out to you and connect and explain, or if there was a problem, to be able to sort things out. Telling everybody about a problem and then never really sharing all of the wins and successes are part of the reason why maybe this isn't already a bigger thing locally. And when it comes to purchasing meats, if you're complaining or if you're concerned about things being individually expensive, consider working with a couple friends, 3 to 4 friends, if you could manage to go and purchase a whole animal and have the butcher process it down and then share that with a couple friends. Maybe 1 or 2 of them are the only ones that have freezers, and you have your share with them. There are a lot of ways that are not that complicated to be able to get these things taken care of. And so everyone that's here, I believe within the discussion, is already doing this from example. So to anyone that tuned in, just go out and get some of these products and get some education, put it into practice, and hashtag and share with everyone and talk about these farms.
Definitely, those are some great points. Thank you for sharing that. I think from here we'll pivot to some questions from our viewers, because there have been a few questions that have come through. So thank you very much for sharing all of that knowledge and experience with us. And I'll start with a question about grocery stores. There's been 2 questions that come up about grocery stores. The idea that, we see in some of our grocery stores that there is a buy local philosophy, and sometimes that local means Ontario, which, is one definition of local. But at the end of the day, sometimes push comes to shove and price is what matters. And that's where they're going to bring a product from. So would we like to see, do you think it'd be valuable if we had more people who shop at grocery stores asking where food comes from, demanding that it comes from, local producers? Is that sort of an impetus, the impetus there on the end consumer, on us as grocery store shoppers to make that happen? Anyone is able, if anyone wants to answer that question.
Go ahead.
Or go ahead, Mark.
Oh, sorry, Mark, you're kind of frozen.
More towards James and Craig.
Okay, sorry, you froze there for a second. So we missed the first part of that.
No, I think more probably James and Craig could probably give a better answer for that one.
Okay, so Truly Northern, for instance. Truly Northern Farms, is that Aaron Christie Road?
Yeah.
They've got wonderful kale and green pea shoots, coriander, I think basil as well. A lot of these are actually available, I think, at the South End Superstore. It'd be interesting to maybe, for people that are already in the farming community, maybe chat with them, open conversations, whether they're in farm to table Northern Ontario or outside. If you have contact with them, ask how they forge that relationship. Maybe you've got something different and you'd like to make it available to somebody who thinks outside the box at their grocery store. I think it's wonderful to think that you've got a product that would be saleable and scalable. It can be difficult. A lot of the time, you're going to have a grocery store having some type of a system where they can screen and survey and like ensure that they're going to be able to get a certain amount of product with a guaranteed level of quality. And sort of like what Mark was saying, it's difficult, but there are people leading the way that do these type of things, that have their locally farmed products available at local grocery stores. And I'd love to see more of it take place, but I would imagine there's some challenges, but the more we share the way that we do these things, I think the better likelihood of this being something that begins to grow or continues to grow.
So it seems to me like in this sort of scenario, it's the producer themselves that are trying to forge that relationships. I guess maybe I should rephrase the question. Would it be easier to make this happen if there was more demand coming from consumers? I mean, I think that's a pretty obvious answer, but is that sort of the disconnect there? Is that why we don't see this more in grocery stores? And maybe, it's harder to infiltrate the superstore than it would be a smaller grocery store like Smith's.
That's definitely true, Erica. It's sort of back to that same restaurant question. It's an issue of scale as well. There isn't even like Smith's. I love the place, or both of them. They're beautiful. I couldn't even begin to supply a place like that on my own. They would easily, and I mean that's an issue with restaurants as well, right? So it's not so much about that demand, and we went through this too with the local too. It was a potential initiative to act as a conduit to get some exposure in where our potential customers would be, and we got a few numbers in of the volumes that go through places like this, and the margins that are low, which is very similar in the restaurant industry. So shelf space at a premium. And there's a risk there of, putting things on the shelf that might not sell as opposed to something else. But I think the biggest, at least from a farmer's perspective, it's scale again. If a retailer starts providing something and customers come to expect it to be there, you really have to have your whole back end supply chain lined up and operating very smoothly to be able to do that. It's very, very difficult. When it's consolidated like that. Now, at the same time, we're trying to move this whole local food movement to being in a more dominant position than something on the fringes. So it's on our backs to get that scale there. But it goes hand in hand with consumer acceptance. I can't suddenly decide I'm going to raise, we do about 100 pigs a year right now. I can't say I'm going to do 500 next year without guaranteeing that's going to be sold somewhere. Otherwise, our farm is done at that point if we can't sell those animals. So that, as an example, I hope that clarifies that a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've come across in some of my work as well, where in this cycle do we break the chain? Is it on the producer side to produce more initially and then go out and make sure that there's places to sell that? Or is it on the end consumer side, restaurants, retailers, maybe we have to make some more relationships and contracts and come into agreements to say, okay, you're going to buy all of this that I'm going to produce. And then that allows the producer to be able to, raise or grow with confidence and know that there is a market there. And I don't think we've come up with any easy answers to how to break that chain, but, hopefully as this continues to grow, we can make that happen. Another question that came in a little bit earlier on, and I'm not sure if if this applies. So the question is, I'll read it straight out. How do you handle the competition established with free trade agreements that allow markets to be flooded with cheaper and often poorer quality products? Do you feel any pressure there from those kinds of larger scale global agreements? Anybody?
I'll start it as a farmer to a degree, but it's all about price. And frankly, that's not our target market. We're not after price sensitive customers, and I understand that people are on a budget, and I'm not trying to demean that in any way. But in reality, it doesn't. I don't even really consider the grocery stores to be our competition either. Although we can actually compete on price, and it's certainly the way Craig mentioned it, we can compete on price on a whole animal basis. But Paul is absolutely right that the vast majority of our products, whether it's meats or produce, come in that way, of vastly inferior quality. And it's not so much a competition thing. It's back to education. And like Mark said, what are you paying for? And there's a lot of people really don't know. And I'm sure we all know that, us in this discussion here, that people really aren't aware of what's happening with their food, how it's produced, what's actually in it. Yeah, it's, yeah.
Does anyone else want to comment on the more, bigger global processes happening? Does that affect you at all?
Well, I mean, as a restaurant, I mean, obviously we see both sides of it, because you have the local chain of it. I mean, I bring it back to my initial point where we're a supermarket generation. When you look at the restaurants, you see the restaurants that are most frequented are the ones that have everything on their menu. And I think in the same thing when it comes to a consumer, they'll go to a grocery store where they got everything in that market, so that it makes it at ease for them. Unfortunately, specialized stores or specialized butchers or specialized restaurants, I think, are the ones that and obviously those are their small business ones, are the ones that suffer in the end a lot of times on that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, another interesting point that's come in, sort of leading on from this discussion that we've just had, is if there's sort of policy pieces that could tip the balance a little bit. So if there were increased costs linked to imports and exports, with like tariffs, for instance, but funding or rebates for local food, would that make a difference at all? Do you think we could sort of change the game a little bit and make it easier for local food, local smaller and medium-sized producers to enter into the market? Anyone?
Yeah, I have some familiarity with this. Some. A friend of mine, a fellow chef, and I believe he's the general manager of the food service aspect of HSN, Stuart Brown. Years ago, when I worked with him on a separate project, but affiliated through HSN, when I was working with Morningstar Hospitality, at HSN, they were actually working with Ontario Pork and I believe Ontario Poultry. And we have to understand that scale was critical for them. And so they were able to use specifically and only, I guess exclusively, Ontario pork products for their entire pork program, as well as the Ontario Poultry. And very good products, well controlled. There was that, it would come in how you would expect it to be. There was some consistency from order to order. It was really not a complicated thing. It did cost them more up front, but the rebates were significant to the point where they did that exclusively. But again, it was the scale of the business. So, maybe if there was a way of having some type of organization, and again, this is just free thinking, but like if we had a few affiliated restaurants that maybe they're all independently known or independently owned, but they work together to be able to create a little bit more of a market, so that we could be working towards credits together. I don't know how that really pans out. I mean, I guess some people are going to buy more than others, but maybe there's a way to rework the way that approach is to be able to create the demand to work with local Northern Ontario products in the restaurants. I mean, at some point, once a few people lead the way, it is going to become something, I dare to say, trendy. I hate the word, but there are positive aspects to it. And as a few more people start to work within that approach of having something within Northern Ontario, it's going to help. And hopefully it becomes something that's more typical, that you see it more often. Mark has always done that. I've always done that in the restaurants where I've been working seasonally. But to expect the place that has always had the same menu with the same salads, the same BLT, and expect them to change over, that's a steep ask. But there are going to be some independently owned and maybe some corporation type restaurants that might have interest, and they might be able to tip the scales in terms of having enough to be large enough to move enough product to make it worthwhile to have something to take that into consideration. It's tough for me to wrap my mind around how it would work, but maybe somebody catches that and can roll with the idea.
Definitely. All right. Well, it's 4 o'clock already, so I think we'll have to leave it there. I apologize if I didn't get to your question, and I'll think of a way that we can maybe get some of those questions answered behind the scenes and shared. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you to James, Craig, and Young for sharing your time and experience with us. And I feel like I have some ideas for where we could move in some of the projects that I'm working on, and maybe even starting some new things to continue this momentum. And I hope that this is actually the first of multiple conversations that we can have about topics within local food. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and I really appreciate your time. And I know that I will talk to you all again at some point. And thanks to everyone that participated today.
Thank you very much.
All right. Oh, and if anyone wants to get a hold of me, you can at erica.lagios@rethinkgreen.ca. So anyone who has any questions and wants to reach out, erica.lagios@rethinkgreen.ca, or you can message me on the Greater Sudbury Food Policy Council Facebook page. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Take care.